Welcome everybody to the Curricula stream. My name is Maureen Person and I will be your moderator for today. Just a few reminders to please keep your audio off during the presentation. Each presentation is 10 minutes long, so it's a very quick time frame. So I will be letting the presenters know when they have a 1-minute warning, and the session is being recorded. So I don't want to take any time because I know everybody wants to hear the great presentations we have in this stream. So I will start with the first presenter, who is going to be Janhavi Patel.
Hello, hi, this is Janvi. Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. Sounds great. So thank you everyone for coming out today. I'm Janvi. I will be sharing with you our research focused on understanding the usefulness of clinical skills taught to medical students, specifically focusing on the respiratory clinical exam. Currently, there is a paucity of literature exploring the clinical relevance of clinical skills which are taught to medical students. Medical schools across Canada currently follow the curricula that is informed by the AFMC and the JAMA Clinical Skills Series. These sources provide a plethora of statistical information, but they do little to discuss the applicability of these skills in the clinical practice today. Given the huge breadth of clinical skills taught and a lack of focus on their clinical utility, students feel overwhelmed and inadequately prepared for clinical work. To explore this idea further, we had two main objectives for our project. The first being to identify if the skills taught in the respiratory clinical exam are actually used in practice, and second, to provide curriculum recommendations to students and educators based on what skills are reported as being most relevant. For that, we disseminated an anonymized online survey to residents and physicians from various different specialties. For this, we used an open recruitment strategy with convenience and snowball sampling. For each clinical skills from the respiratory exam, the respondents answered to two main questions. The first, do they find that this skill is useful in their clinical practice? And the second, should this skill be taught to medical students? At the end of the questionnaire, we also provided physicians with an opportunity to leave some comments regarding their thoughts about the utility of these clinical skills and clinical exam in general in practice today. Basic statistical and thematic analysis were done on the survey responses. As for our results, we had 161 physicians respond to our survey, giving us a response rate of 20.1%. From those participants, majority were physicians who were practicing family medicine, and they have been in practice for around 1 to 5 years. I would now like to draw your attention to the table, which provides the percentage of how many respondents found a particular skill useful and how many of them think that this skill should be taught to medical students. As you can see, auscultating for breath sounds was voted unanimously to be a useful skill and a skill that should be taught to medical students. However, other auscultation skills like whispered pectoriloquy or bronchophony were not found to be as useful by all participants. All skills under the inspection section were found to be useful and were skills that majority thought should be taught to medical students. Tracheal deviation was the only skill under the palpation section, which the respondents found to be a skill which should be taught. And neither percussion skills like intercostal percussion or diaphragmatic excursion were found to be useful by the majority. However, a majority of people did say that intercostal percussion should be taught to medical students. So as you can see, there's a little bit of disparity in terms of what they are finding to be actual useful skills and what they are saying should be taught to medical students. So we did a thematic analysis on the final comments that were left by all the respondents to kind of understand some of the reasons why they thought that some skills should still be taught despite their limited clinical use. Some reasons that were suggested were that skills teach disease pathophysiology to medical students, that some skills might be useful in low resource settings, such as settings which do not have proper imaging capabilities, and also some skills might be more useful for certain specialties compared to others. As part of our study, we found that many respiratory skills taught in the McMaster curriculum are not used in practice by physicians today. The skills that were found to be useful were general indicators of respiratory health, which suggests that clinical exam might be more used for preliminary screening rather than diagnostic purposes now. Given the reasons highlighted earlier regarding the importance of these skills for other purposes, we suggest that rather than removing these skills from the curriculum, a better avenue would be to emphasize the maneuvers that are actually used in clinical practice and then teach the other maneuvers for their other purposes. Future learning objectives as a part of the medical curriculum should be focused on mastering the clinical skills which are actually useful in practice, and that we also suggest that more weightage should be placed on formative as well as summative assessments for these skills. As a part of the research moving forward, our team's plan is to do similar analysis on different clinical exams, as well as do comparisons between different physicians across different specialties to better assess the usefulness of clinical exam in practice today. In conclusion, this is the first pilot study highlighting the difference between skills taught in medical school with their utility in actual clinical practice. To better focus studying and student preparedness for clinical settings, greater emphasis should be placed on more useful skills in pre-clerkship training. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much, Dahiva. We'll open it up to any questions. You can write your questions in the chat and I will keep an eye on that. Or you can just unmute yourself and ask a question. So, I actually do have a question just to ask you. We teach, I'm an educator in the BSCN program at MAC, and we teach those particular skills as well in physical assessment, and always find it very challenging because often the students are uninterested in some of the skills that they don't necessarily practice in clinical placements. So when you talk about trying to focus more on the formative or the summative assessment, can you maybe provide a little bit more detail of what you think that might look like?
Yeah, for sure. It's very good to get some of the perspective from other healthcare specialties too, kind of seeing that this is something that you guys also experience, because that was also something we were interested in looking at. So it's definitely interesting to discuss. Some things that we discussed in terms of how we can better focus our assessments on. So we do OSCEs every year for our class. And then the assessment for the OSCE has been the same since the past. I don't even remember the last time that it was evaluated. And it's essentially a checklist. And they essentially take mark for every single skill and seeing if they have performed or at least spoken about the skill. And I think that is one place that we were discussing we should probably target the results from this study at. So maybe in our assessment for the tick marks and seeing if they actually included or performed the skill should be the skills which are actually useful in clinical practice. And then in other assessments where students have the opportunity to kind of discuss their learning and understanding, like their weekly clinical teaching sessions or their CBL case-based learning sessions, that is where they can discuss the skills which are more relevant for understanding the disease pathophysiology. Like something that we discussed particularly was pulsus paradoxus. That gives a very good indication of the disease pathophysiology and why there's a drop in blood pressure. But it is often very difficult to do and not practiced commonly because of the automatic blood blood pressure monitoring and the cardiac monitors, which are available, and you can put patients on it for a very long-term basis and monitor their vitals like that. So I think those skills are definitely useful, and those are places where we can incorporate them.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And I agree. I feel like we have been using the same checklist for years, and it really is time to relook at where we put that weight on, as well as that's a great idea to sort of focus on some of those less used skills or less often used skills. Whether it's in relationship to a care scenario in PBL or in clinical practice, but not necessarily test them on that. So thank you so much. Is there any other questions? We have about 30 seconds before we have to move on. All right, I think that's it. So again, thank you so much for sharing your work with us today.
Of course, thank you.
So I'm just going to move on to our next presenter, and we have Victoria David, who will be presenting for us. Oh, sorry, there is one question in the chat. My apologies. What's your hypothesis regarding the persistence of teaching techniques that are not used clinically?
In terms of our hypothesis, so when we initially were looking at it, we kind of just wanted to get everyone's perspectives on what they think the utility of the skills were. So we didn't go in thinking that they were definitely not useful. It was more from a colloquial learning standpoint where we were thinking that some skills might not be as relevant, and that's the whole basis for the study. But it was after, when we did the thematic analysis, there were some of the themes which were drawn where they suggested that these skills could still be used and might be helpful for teaching to the students, regardless of their clinical utility. And some of the things that were mentioned were that they would be useful in low resource setting, or like just to explain the pathophysiology.
Excellent, thank you. All right, so now we will move on to Victoria David.
Hi, can you hear me?
Absolutely, yes.
Sorry, I'm on service and the computers here are terrible, so I'm also phoning in from my iPhone. So I'll just begin because I know we're tight for time. So I'm one of the hematology residents, and I'll be presenting my project, Geriatric Oncology Needs Assessment, which is a national survey of hematology residents across Canada. So essentially the background is, with our aging population in Canada, the incorporation of a geriatric oncology curriculum into hematology and oncology residency training has been recognized as a priority to improve the care of older adults with cancer. In fact, a recent survey of Canadian oncology residents reported that 49% of trainees lack confidence in managing unique aspects of care that are specific to older patients. And in fact, there is a paucity of data on the inclusion of geriatric oncology into hematology residency training in Canada. And so really the purpose of this study was to conduct a needs assessment to understand the residents' views and needs for a geriatric oncology curriculum during hematology residency training in Canada. And so this was a cross-sectional study of Canadian hematology residents. 70 residents were eligible to participate, so both are English and French speaking residents. The survey was developed in discussion with nurses, geriatricians, oncologists, and hematologists. The survey was initially piloted with 3 non-hematology residents and revised based on their feedback. The survey itself used a combination of Likert scale, multiple choice, and open-ended questions. Outcome variables that we looked at in the survey included the current state of geriatric oncology training, interest in a geriatric oncology curriculum, as well as curriculum objectives. The survey itself was open from June 2nd to 30th, 2020, and it was distributed electronically via the program directors. And we use descriptive statistics for data analysis. So I'll just jump into the results. So of the 70 residents, 29 participated. So that's a response rate of 41.4%. Now, I want you guys to look in the sort of middle column. There's two graphs. The top one is where I'll start chatting a bit about. So on the vertical axis is just things we asked the residents, and on the horizontal axis is the percent of respondents, and in red is essentially no, and in blue is yes. And so the first thing that the first line, we essentially asked the residents if they were aware of general or cancer-specific frailty or geriatric tools. So that's the 1A, and just over half, so 19 of the 29 residents were aware. So there was some awareness from the trainees. Of those 19 trainees that were aware of these frailty or geriatric oncology tools, 9 were in PGY4 and 10 were in PGY5. So it was fairly split among the trainee level. And there were 2 tools that were sort of more widely known, which was the International Myeloma Working Group tool, which is used for multiple myeloma, and the Cumulative Illness Rating Scale, which is used for chronic lymphocytic leukemia. Other tools were less well known. One of the tools that is not specifically a frailty tool, but is used in a clinic broadly to all our patients, is the ECOG tool, which is the Eastern Cooperative Oncology Performance Status. And that's just to assess the fitness of a patient regardless of age. And trainees are all aware of, we're quite familiar with that tool. So then moving down to the second, so the second bar on that first graph. So the majority of trainees, so what's in red, 72%, have never been taught about frailty or geriatric tools. So essentially 3/4 of trainees have never received training. And more broadly, it's not illustrated on the graph, but the majority, 59%, so 17 of 19 of the 29 trainees, never had any academic half-day sessions that focused on providing care to older adults with hematologic cancers. Moving down to the third bar. So again, the majority of trainees, essentially 86%, have never seen a staff use or themselves use a frailty or geriatric tool to assess their patients in a cancer clinic. And then similarly, the majority of trainees, so the fourth bar on that first graph, 80% have not had access to specialized geriatric oncology residents. And finally, in the fifth bar graph, again, the majority of trainees, so 86%, were unaware of how to access further resources or anything that would help them learn about how to provide better care to geriatric oncology patients. And so overall, sort of the conclusion was there was like quite a gap in what is being taught. And of the 29 trainees, 28, so 97%, felt that their program should be delivering a geriatric oncology curriculum. And so if you look down now on the second chart, so the one at the bottom, this is really capturing what trainees would like to learn in their curriculum. So the vertical axis is the topics, the horizontal axis is the percent of respondents. And then you'll notice there's 4 colors. So in light green is what trainees felt that they already knew. In light blue were trainees that they definitely wanted to learn. In red were what they may want to learn. And in dark blue is what they did not want to learn, or they didn't feel they needed to learn. So the topics that residents most wish to learn are the top 3 on the graph, which was assessment of patients prior to chemotherapy decision. Then the next one was assessment of patients to predict chemotherapy toxicity. And then the third most popular was ethical issues regarding treatment initiation, continuation, and termination. But you'll notice that a lot of the topics trainees still were interested in learning, they just weren't as popular. So I guess, moving forward with these results, what can we take away? So, I mentioned 2 of the more commonly cited tools were the IMWG myeloma tool and the CLL-CIRS tool. But there's in fact a lot of frailty tools that do exist for other hematologic malignancies such as myelodysplastic syndrome, but trainees weren't aware of them. And it's unclear why. why they're not aware of all these different tools. But again, one of the takeaways is trainees are lacking a knowledge about these different frailty tools to assess our patients. And so on top of the specific topics that I've highlighted in the second chart, I think in the curriculum itself, we should be incorporating these standardized tools to assess frailty of our patients. But that does, lead to a challenge, which is, if there are a lot of frailty tools, it can get fairly cumbersome to learn them all. And the National Comprehensive Cancer Network does have clinical practice guidelines for older patients, and they do identify something called the Comprehensive Geriatric Assessment, a CGA, as a helpful tool to assess a patient's morbidity and mortality. So it'd be sort of an all-encompassing tool, but that tool itself is quite time-intensive. And so screening tools would be important to identify which patients would benefit from this more sort of comprehensive assessment. In our survey, our residents were very familiar with the ECOG, which is, applied to all age groups. But a study has shown that the ECOG is an appropriate screening tool to identify patients that would benefit from a CGA. So I think, again, incorporating, the ECOG itself, which is one of the tools that we use quite commonly in our clinic, would sort of facilitate some learning for our trainees. So overall, just in conclusion, the survey did confirm a lack of geriatric oncology training for hematology residents in Canada. And really, this then leads to the fact that there's a need for a dedicated geriatric oncology curriculum integrated into our hematology residency training in Canada. So I'll just stop there and open it up for questions.
Thank you, Victoria. Any questions from the audience? So I have a question in. Oh, sorry. I'm trying to follow the chat conversation. And I think the question was related to the previous presentation. But Victoria, I do have just more of a comment. My research program involves caregivers and supporting caregivers. And I found it, kind of interesting that on that particular scale, that looking at supporting caregivers, especially when the care recipient is going through such a traumatic experience with, hematology cancer. So I was a bit concerned about that and just wondered what your perspective is on that, and would that be also something that you would like to see in a curriculum?
Yeah, it is interesting when you look at the breakdown of what trainees were sort of interested in and less interested in. And I think, I'd be making assumptions here because I didn't really sort of ask residents to justify. I think one of the big challenges that we face in our clinics are, is this person appropriate for treatment? Is this person, when do we stop treatment? And I think with those decisions carry what we feel are, significant change in outcomes for the patient. Do we focus on quality of life, quantity? And I think that's perhaps why there was more focus on those, when do we initiate chemotherapy? How do we predict the toxicity, which would help us inform that? What are the ethical issues around starting, stopping? So perhaps that's why it's more popular, but I agree topics like supporting caregivers, accessing community resources are incredibly important, because if our patients don't have access to this, then they're less likely to have a smooth, there will be more challenges as they go through treatment, and it will also impact their outcome. And so I think there was still a fairly, I would say for those, about 50% of trainees were definitely interested, and about 40% were potentially interested. So I think there's value in incorporating that into the curriculum itself. And then just, once we do a pilot of this curriculum, getting some feedback on if they felt that was helpful. It may also be that, physicians and the residents felt that maybe some of these topics were better handled by the multidisciplinary team, because in our cancer centers, we have, social workers, oncology sort of nurses and all these people that help sort of with that whole care. And so residents may have felt that some of that work falls under the scope of somebody else. So that's also potentially what may have influenced this perspective.
Excellent. Thank you for that insight. All right. Okay, we're going to quickly move on to our next presenter, our presenters. We have Jennifer Nash and Anna Olivieri.
Hello there. I'm going to start things off today. So thank you for joining us to discuss the Introduction to Interdisciplinary Curriculum and Readiness for Interprofessional Learning in the Bhsc program. The Bachelor of Health Science Honors Program, or the Bhsc program, is an undergraduate program in the Faculty of Health Sciences, which accepts students directly from secondary school. The program is grounded in inquiry-based and experiential learning with a focus on the development of a specific skill set. Upon completion of the four-year program, students may enter into careers or into additional education academic training. Program alumni work as clinicians in research, education, policy, law, the community, and beyond. Health Sci 1Go2, or Interdisciplinary Problem Solving in Health, is a new required course for all Level 1 students of the program. The course was developed and first offered in 2019 based on an opportunity to provide students with earlier exposure to thinking of health from a variety of perspectives, when many of their first and second year courses have a very biological or biomedical focus, things like cell biology, anatomy, chemistry. And it also provides an opportunity to give some scaffolding and to provide some context for the work, the learning that they're going to do in the program over the next 4 years. The course has now been offered twice, once in 2019, which was in an in-person format, and once in 2020 in a virtual or synchronous format due to the COVID-19 pandemic. When the transition was made to the virtual synchronous format, the course instructor team created a video introduction to the course to share with students during the summer before the students began. The video featured all 4 of our co-instructors who come from different disciplines across the university, including pathology, molecular medicine, health policy, anesthesia, and the local community. In addition to introducing the course itself, for example, talking a little bit about the content and the structure, each instructor took time to share a bit about their role, their past and current perspectives on health, and the importance of interdisciplinary learning and collaboration in the work that they do. For example, one of the instructors talked about how their understanding of health has evolved over the past 20 years from their time as an undergraduate student to present day. The project that we're sharing with you today explores the differences between the 2019 and 2020 cohorts and their readiness for interprofessional learning at the outset of their undergraduate experience. I'm going to turn it over to Anna to talk about our methods and results.
Thanks, Jen. So in order to answer to our aim, this evaluation that we conducted was part of the Faculty of Health Sciences wide initiative to measure readiness for interprofessional education. And in this initiative, 2 consecutive cohorts of 435 first-year students from the Bachelor of Health Science program were invited to participate. You can see in the methods that a question was distributed to the students, and this was done using the quizzes function on Avenue to Learn. And this questionnaire included sociodemographic questions such as their age, gender, their cohort year, and previous experiences with interprofessional education. Finally, we also asked students to fill in the Readiness for Interprofessional Learning scale, from now on called the Ripples. And the Ripples is a 19-item scale with total scores ranging from 19, which shows lower readiness, and to 95, which shows high readiness. This questionnaire is composed of 4 subscales, and those subscales are teamwork and collaboration, negative and positive professional identity, and finally, roles and responsibilities. And I would also like to mention that this questionnaire has been validated and used to assess readiness for interprofessional education widely. in order to compare both cohorts, but also to control for some variables of interest, such as age, gender, and previous interprofessional education experience, we use the one-way ANCOVA. So you can see in table 1 on the right side of the poster that 88 students from the 2019 cohort and 153 students from the 2020 cohort participate. You can also see that we have higher percentage of female students in the 2020 cohort, as well as higher response rate. As for the readiness for interprofessional learning, in the 2019 cohort presented higher scores than the 2020 cohort for the total ripples, and specifically for the subscales of positive professional identity and teamwork. And this is shown in figure 1B and also in figure 1C. We found no differences between the cohorts for the negative professional identity subscale, so cohorts were pretty similar in this one. And against all this tendency that we've been seeing, the 2020 cohort actually scored statistically significant higher in the roles and responsibilities subscales than the 2019. And this you can see this in figure 1D on the poster. And I'm now going to pass up to Jen to finish our conclusions.
Thank you, Anna. We believe that the COVID-19 pandemic may have contributed to the decrease in Ripple scores seen in some of the subscales. Data that's not presented here showed a similar trend where readiness for interprofessional learning was lower in the 2020 cohort than in 2019 cohorts across other disciplines and programs in the Faculty of Health Sciences at McMaster. Something that was different in the Bhsc cohort was an increase in the roles and responsibilities subscores. The only thing that changed between the two cohorts was the creation and sharing of the course introductory video for the 2020 cohort, which was viewed prior to their arrival at McMaster and therefore prior to their completion of the Ripples questionnaire, because that questionnaire was completed at the very beginning of their term in their first week of classes at McMaster. We hypothesized that this introductory video and the content within may have impacted students' readiness for interprofessional learning, specifically in this subscale. Further analyses are planned with the data for the incoming cohort for September 2021. Additionally, we've collected some pre and post-course Ripples data, which we will be beginning to analyze in hopes of understanding the impact of the completion of the entire course on readiness for interprofessional learning. Thank you for listening, and we look forward to discussing any questions that you might have.
Thank you very much, Jen and Anna. Are there any questions from the audience? Bruce has a question.
Yeah, thanks. Great talk. Thanks. That was really interesting. I put the question also in the chat. But so Ripples and IPS are designed mainly for professional students, so like nurses or physicians or whatever, OTs. And these are clearly pre-professional. So did they identify with like a profession, or they just sort of take it as this is just the way I feel right now? I'm just sort of interested in that because it's kind of a hard scale to work with sometimes. I've used it a few times.
I can start things off, and then maybe Anna, you can add on if there's anything else. So it's a great question, Bruce. The Ripples questionnaire is something that's being used by Piper across all of the different programs in the Faculty of Health Sciences, which the majority of them are professional programs. And BHSC is a bit of a different program, being a pre-professional program and accepting students directly from high school. So it is different. We did not ask the students to associate, identify with a specific profession. This was done in the very first week of their undergraduate university experience. So yeah, we didn't ask them to identify with anything, and we didn't ask any questions related to that. So that is something I think that we'll have to take into consideration as we're taking a deeper dive into our results, looking at the additional Ripples data. Anna, anything else to add?
Yeah, thanks, Jen. That is a really good question and something to look at in the future. I just want to add that the ripples also, it is quite broad in terms of what it asks. So it asks about healthcare students in general and healthcare roles in general. And I think our hypothesis here was that by introducing this video that showed different health professionals that have graduated from the Bachelor of Health Sciences, they kind of figured out what they would be looking for after finishing graduation. So that might have not been so specific in terms of the disciplines that they represent, but more broad in terms of roles that they could follow in the future if they wanted to. So I think this was basically, or could be probably, what allows us to have more or higher scores in the roles and responsibilities, but we don't have, as you asked, specific, or we didn't ask them to specifically relate to any discipline or profession.
All right, thank you very much, Anna and Jennifer. And we will move on to our next presenter, Sunya Kim will be presenting next.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
So my building has a fire alarm now, so I will run to the balcony if it gets noisy. Sorry for that. So hello, everyone. Thank you for providing me with this opportunity to talk about my study. My name is Sung-Ha Kim, and I'm a PhD candidate in the Rehab Science program at McMaster University. Today's presentation is part of my PhD thesis project, and the manuscript of this study was recently accepted by the Journal of Occupational Therapy Education. So the title is Development of the Theory and Evidence-Based Do Live Well Workshops for Canadian Occupational Therapists. And my co-authors are Dr. Rebecca Gorge, Dr. Ilana Bayer, Dr. Nadine Lariviere, and Dr. Lori Lett. So the use of theoretical framework is important in healthcare practice, and in occupational therapy, frameworks make direct assumptions about humans and occupation and guide professional and clinical reasoning. The Do Live Well framework is a Canadian occupation-focused health promotion approach developed by occupational therapists to promote Canadians' health and wellness. So the key idea of the Do Live Well framework is that participating in a variety of occupations with optimal activity patterns and sufficient social and personal support can lead to a wide range of positive health and wellness benefits. So this framework is relatively new, and there has been some interest among occupational therapists for both online and in-person learning opportunities to translate the Do Live Well concepts into the occupational therapy practice. So as a pre-implementation study that compared the effectiveness of online and in-person Do Live Well workshops for Canadian occupational therapists and understanding their use of the Do Live Well framework in practice, we described the process of developing online and in-person educational interventions in this study. So the purpose of this study was to develop theory and evidence-based online and in-person educational Do Live Well workshops for Canadian occupational therapists. So the research team worked in the 3 phases to develop the workshops, and they were as follows. So phase 1, understanding current users' perspective and experience of applying the Do Live Well framework. And phase 2, developing workshop content and incorporating the key principles of the problem-based learning approach. And phase 3, carrying out a usability test of the online workshop website. So in phase 1, we studied the key aspect of the Do Live Well framework to be included in the educational workshops by conducting semi-structured interviews with 4 occupational therapists who were using the Do Live Well framework in their practice. So we asked them about their use of framework and their training needs. And the interviews were transcribed and analyzed using thematic analysis. In phase 2, we developed identical content for online and in-person workshops based on the findings from phase 1. We incorporated problem-based learning principles to develop a learner-centered environment. In phase 3, we used Articulate 360 to develop e-learning modules and use WordPress to create an online workshop website. To improve the usability, we ask 4 experts to complete a usability test of the website. So these experts included a graphic designer, web developer, university instructor, and an occupational therapist as a learner. So the experts accessed and they navigated the website freely, and they completed the usability test regarding navigation, accessibility, consistency, visual design, and other aspects of the usability questionnaires. So as a result, in phase 1, we identified 3 main themes in occupational therapist perspectives and experience of applying the framework. So the Deliver framework helped their clients reflect on their daily activities that could be related to their health and wellness. But occupational therapists were struggling with the application of the framework. So they wanted to learn more about how to apply the Deliver concepts in their practice. In phase 2, we created PowerPoint slides with written script to ensure equivalent online and in-person workshops. We created case scenarios because the occupational therapist in phase 1 wanted to learn more about how to apply the concepts in their real-world practice. The details of the online and in-person workshop sessions are presented in the table on the screen. The workshop consists of 4 sessions. The in-person workshop was designed as a 1-day, 8-hour workshop, and we planned an online workshop that lasted for 4 weeks so that learners would have flexibility in terms of when to complete their sessions. But ideally, they were asked to complete 1 session per week. And 8 key principles of problem-based learning were incorporated into the workshop delivery method, so including self-directedness, internal motivation, prior knowledge and experience, applicability in practice, cognitive process, and active learning, interaction with learners, and elaboration and reflection. So as an example of application, applying the problem-based learning approach, so self-directedness was incorporated by asking learners to set their own learning goals. And in phase 3, the overall usability test score of the online workshop website ranged from 85 to 92%. And so the qualitative findings from the free text answers suggest that the website workshop was easy to access and navigate, but the visual design could be more user-friendly. Also, the terms, resources, and activities needed to be clarified. So we further refined the website based on the experts' usability test result and feedback. First, to improve the visual design and provide some differentiation, we used different images on the front page and other pages. And we increased the font size of some slides for better readability. Moreover, unnecessary animations on the lecture slides were removed to allow learners to better focus on the content. Some wording was clarified and a booklet was prepared that contained learning resources, which subsequently was included in the in-person workshop as well. All these modifications to online workshop did not affect the similarities between the online and in-person workshops in any way. So the finalized workshop website appears in the figure on the screen. So in conclusion, we believe this study provided a detailed description of how to develop evidence and theory-based continuing learning opportunities for occupational therapists. And we hope this project functions as an audit trail of educational intervention by providing educators with key components and processes to adopt in developing educational programs. Thank you so much. And please let me know if you have any questions or comments.
Thank you very much, Sunya. We have about a minute to answer any questions from the audience. I don't see any questions in the chat. I was curious, Sunya, is this workshop on the website? So is the future to plan on repeating it online again? And is this website open to only the students who register for it?
So this website is only for the participants who register the workshop. So we already conducted the online workshop and also provided a hybrid version of this workshop with some synchronous features. So, but currently we close these workshops, and then maybe in the future we can use it, but maybe there might be some more improvement.
Thank you. And I'm just going to check the chat one more time. Okay, all right. Excellent. Thank you so much for sharing your project with us. And we will move on to our last presentation by Anne Cougarthin.
Hi, yes, I'm here.
Excellent. Oops, sorry, need to move the slide. There we go.
Awesome. Am I good to start?
Absolutely.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So my name is Anne, and I am a master's student at McMaster in the MedSci program. And I'll today discuss my work as a TA for Public Health Professor Dr. Emma Apatu, where I helped develop a Master's of Public Health Professional Development course during the COVID-19 pandemic, and discuss the application of the SAMON model that we used as our framework. So just a bit of background. Originally, our professional development course was entirely seminar-based, which included a variety of public health speakers discussing various topics in the field. And student feedback expressed the need for a course that better prepared them for careers in public health by linking the use of evidence-informed decision-making and project management skills to practice. So as public health courses in Ontario universities moved online due to the pandemic, instructors were required to simulate their teaching online while maintaining student engagement. So previous research has shown that there's a lack of description for the development of online public health courses. And the pandemic also highlighted the need for well-trained public health workers to effectively communicate health information to general audiences. So in search for successful frameworks that can be used to develop an effective and engaging online course, the SAMON model, described by Professor and digital learning innovator Jilly Salmon, was found. So here we outline how we use this framework to formulate our online professional development course in preparation for either a practicum thesis and future careers in public health for graduate students. So the SAMON model provides a 5-stage framework for the development of a concise, engaging, and impactful online course. So the first stage is called access and information. So the goal here is to allow students to access course content and familiarize themselves with the online environment, while also enabling them to feel that help is at hand. Instructors should not assume that students will be comfortable using online platforms. So we implemented this aim by providing clear point form directions on the homepage to find things like instructor email, syllabus, due dates, course assessments. We also provided students with Excel sign-up sheets to organize time to virtually meet with the instructor one-on-one to share career interests. And to further the connection between the instructor and the students, we also embedded intro videos into each unit where the instructor explained an overview of the unit and the learning outcomes. So this was done to mimic in-person learning and better facilitate navigation through the unit. So finally, we employed an online platform called Flipgrid, where students uploaded videos or audios of themselves answering questions about what program they'll be in and their future goals in public health. So the aim was to allow students to introduce themselves and get to know their peers while also familiarizing themselves with the new online environment. So next we have stage 2 and 3, which we combined together, online socialization and information exchange. So the aim here was to provide students with platforms to communicate information with peers and engage in submissions by others. So the primary outcome of this stage is to help students understand the importance of learning together and how they can contribute to and engage in group work. So to initiate discussion, we first conducted a live lecture outlining tips on writing a CV and setting up a LinkedIn account. And following this, we provided students clear links to a discussion thread where they had to post questions or concerns that they encountered while setting these two up. And another part of this assessment was to comment on a peer's post with a post or resource that was helpful to address that concern. So this was done again to strengthen online socialization by facilitating the exchange of learned information. We also included a unit here where we embedded videos that we had asked our alumni to send regarding their experiences doing either a practicum or thesis in public health. So this was done to help students in their decision-making regarding their future plans in public health. And stage 4, entitled Knowledge Construction, this was a crucial stage in our course. The aim was to present students with skills and tools that will allow them to critically evaluate issues, compare, contrast, and hypothesize solutions. So here we conducted live lectures, which included the description of 3 specific skills that public health professionals undertake and use within their profession. So first was describe the nuances surrounding evidence-informed decision-making. And secondly was project management and its application within the public health workforce. And thirdly, communication strategies and the ability to communicate health information to various audiences. So this theoretical background provided students with the knowledge required to apply these skills in the final stage, which was development. So the aim here was to encourage students to apply that knowledge, allowing them to make their own judgment and communicate their ideas to various audiences. So here we utilize a public health case study, which was completed in groups. So the students' main responsibility was to participate as a senior management team at a local public health unit in Ontario. And the case study scenario was developed in such a way where they were approached with an offer of $1 million in funding for at least 10 years to use towards one of 5 programs. So their job was to select one program that should be funded and support their selection based on the evidence available for each program. They had to plan how the project will be executed using expected timelines and things like Gantt charts. And lastly, they had to effectively communicate their decision using a PowerPoint presentation to a mock board of health. And this was role played by the instructor of the course. So the case study was designed to use the 3 skill builders that were learned in the previous stage in a public health scenario that was similar to what could be seen in practice. So in terms of results and conclusions, so we conducted a mid and end course survey to assess 2 things. So it was the course layout and the assessments. So in terms of the course layout, so these were qualitative assessments. So these were direct quotes or responses from the students for these questions that had to do with these 2 subject areas. So in terms of the layout, students were generally very comfortable navigating through online platforms. They found the instructor intro videos helpful since outlining objectives and time required to complete these assessments allowed them to allocate time appropriately. And in terms of criticisms, they preferred less online platforms to engage in as they found it slightly overwhelming. And then in terms of the assessments, the students found it easy to complete them on time and around their schedules. They generally enjoyed the case study working with peers and found it a relevant assessment to practically apply public health skills learned. So in conclusion, majority of the student feedback was positive regarding the framework of the course. Specifically, clear instructions at the beginning of the course to navigate and engage in material, along with clearly defined learning outcomes, are necessary for successful participation. And we also learned that it is important to keep the online engagement simple and relevant to current events. And the use of discussion threads to facilitate communication between peers was a crucial feature in keeping students engaged in course materials. So taken together, the Salmon model was an impactful framework to design an engaging and effective public health professional development course. So that's the conclusion of my presentation. So I'd be happy to take any questions or comments.
My complete apologies first. I have no idea how.
No worries, I was just afraid if I passed the time or something.
No, and we were running late, so I wanted to try and sneak and see what was next on the agenda.
Oh, I see.
And I completely switched the slides. My apologies greatly. Please, anybody who has a question, there's your slide back as I had a little panic attack. Again, my apologies. Any questions from the audience? I do have just one quick question, and it's more of what are kind of the plans moving forward? Only because I feel like we're sort of running in this time where most of us have moved all of our, education online, and we have found it to be, obviously there's some successes, some not, but is this something when we go back to face that you would still offer online, or have you even sort of thought about that?
So the instructor of the course is here. I'm not sure if she has any plans for continuing this course online. Emma, are you present?
Yes, I'm here. I think the students, they really enjoyed the virtual offering, but I think in many instances, students miss the in-person connections. And I think, for example, like the case studies, that exercise done in person is much richer. So I think we'll probably think of a blended format moving forward. Unfortunately, not for this fall, but maybe for next year.
Thank you for sharing that. Well, that is it for this session. Thank you so much. You've got a few minutes before the closing remarks, and thank you to all the presenters. Those were amazing projects, and it was great to listen to all of them.